Yeah, sorry. Is this an old one? So it has all of that. Nothing's that meaningful. Don't worry. We should make this start. Yeah. And then get off the stage.
Right.
Should I do it?
He's working.
Yeah.
Just speak to it.
Should I say everything? Take the microphone. Hello, everyone. Is that all right? Hi. Thank you all very much for coming tonight to CIC for the launch, co-hosted with Megawra, for the launch of Cairo Divided publication. As you can see, I'm speaking. It's not on, no. I'm speaking into a microphone that doesn't amplify, which is a really weird experience. And all our speakers should know that you should speak into them because we're recording, and this is our unique way of doing it. And please don't switch the mics off, because that switches the entire signal off. So I wanted to thank, first of all, Jack Shenker for coming along and representing him and Jason Larkin on this publication. CIC was approached by Jason to do the launch, and knowing that we were super able to come up with input on the photography side, but not quite on such an expert level on the architecture and urbanism side, we asked Mejawra to build a contribution of people who could get more of a discussion going at the event tonight. Sadly, Jason Larkin, the photographer of the project, can't make it tonight. So we've had the lights off at this period so that you could kind of look at the slideshow of images, and of course you have the publication there in your hands. I want to also thank Sylvia Moliki, who has organized tonight, but is unable to come as well, so I'm hosting instead. We're going to, I think what we should do is, Jack, you should probably just generally introduce the project, tell us the story of how it came about, and then we can invite some reflections and questions from the panelists, and then we can open it up to the general audience, and I think it should be pretty informal to do it that way. I'm going to just introduce you all. And I'm sorry, I'm just not the kind of person who can remember introductions and biographies off by heart, so I am just going to read, I'm afraid. Jack Shenker is a writer and Egypt-based reporter for The Guardian, and the author of the text in Cairo Divided. Jason Larkin, who is not here tonight, is a photographer based between London and South Africa, and he's with Panos Agency. Ahmed Zaazaa is an architect and is the Officer for Urbanism and Social Responsibility at Megawra. Wafaa Nadim is Lecturer of Architecture at the British University in Egypt and a team member on issues of housing in a Megawra research team on empowerment and the built environment. She worked with the Arab contractors before she moved to the UK to pursue her MSc and her PhD. During this period, she was a work package leader on the Manu-Build EU research project to improve the quality of affordable housing in response to end-user requirements. She has published a number of papers on the future of modern methods of construction and its potentials to respond to market needs. Ursula is a journalist and writer based in Egypt since 2002, who writes about culture, politics, education and media in the Arab world. She has written several articles about Cairo's urban landscape. And Mohamed ElShahed is a doctoral candidate in the Middle East Study Department at New York University. His research focuses on architecture and urban planning in Egypt from 1939 to 1965, and he runs the blog The Cairo Observer. I also just want to quickly introduce Maria Labrashi, who's the central figure at Megawra, and maybe she can just tell you a little bit about Megawra Hub as an organization, as our co-hosts. That's all right.
Hello everyone, I'm going to make this very brief. I just would like to thank you all for coming today. And I'd like to thank CIC for asking us to co-host this event. I'd also like to thank them for actually funding our first event ever, which we had here some months ago. And so we hope to continue to do that, to work together in different things. Just very quickly, Megawra is a new space that is opening on the 5th of February. It's going to be a hub for architects, a place for them to work, to interact, to have discussions, etc. And we're hoping to make it as interdisciplinary as possible. And there's a very short fact sheet over there about Megawra that doesn't have our contact information, but feel free to talk to me or to Ahmed Zaazaa about it later if you want.
I'll try not to trip over the mic and start playing air guitar or something, because this is a bit bizarre. But thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And it feels like a great time to get some people together and be talking about issues of urban space, particularly into the mic. There we go. I knew I'd called it the first hurdle. Keep reminding me if I mess up. Particularly given the past 12 months when the various streets around us have been transformed from the very familiar and mundane into something very different, at times conflict zones, at times sites of resistance or struggle, at other times celebration. It's also been a period in which those contests of urban spaces have played a big part in Egypt's political narrative. We've seen right now, just a few blocks away, the concrete walls which SCAF have put up in an attempt to, in many ways, impose an architecture of occupation, as Mohamed has called it on his blog, and also in many ways remove the political process that's been going on for the past 12 months away from the street and towards the institutionalized organs of inverted commas democracy that they have been creating. And it's been fascinating to watch the way activists have in many ways taken an insurgent approach and challenged that, particularly through the Kazaboom screenings, going out into different urban neighbourhoods, taking their own narrative about army brutality and about the revolution back into different urban spaces. We've also seen time and again crises in urban security, sometimes real, sometimes manufactured, being used to justify repressive policies from the state. I'm thinking of the so-called assault on the Israeli embassy, which led to extensions in the emergency law, reimposition of a lot of the apparatus of repression that existed during the Mubarak regime. So urban space and issues over urban space have never been more critical, and they were, even before the revolution, it was something that Jason and I were very interested in, which is why we developed this project, Cairo Divided. Just very briefly, it was something that was originally conceived of as a magazine feature. Jason was fascinated visually by these really bizarre and very disorientating spaces, which I'm sure you've all spent a bit of time in, or at least driven through. We managed to get out there and spend a lot of time speaking to everybody from developers who are buying up this land and beginning to build on it, the engineers who are designing all of these structures, the labourers who are actually building them brick by brick, the people who are buying them, the people who are guarding them. We had to pull off various blagging techniques to get through the gates of places like Dreamland and Sodix West Town and Beverly Hills, Katamea Heights. I'm happy to report that Katamea Heights has a very progressive policy on golf membership for gay couples after our inquiries on that front to get through the door. So, you know, we were really trying to engage on all different levels with glad that's worked for some. We were really trying to engage on all different levels with what the Satellite Cities project and what the Desert Towns means to Egypt, means to Cairo, what the political implications are. And hopefully you'll all have a chance to read the essay. If you don't, let me know and I can email you a PDF. But just very, very briefly, we were particularly struck by the contradictions in the Satellite Cities project. The idea of building towns in the desert, as my far more esteemed and knowledgeable colleagues I'm sure will be able to explain, is not particularly new. I mean, Heliopolis was created at the turn of the last century, but the kind of desert towns that we're talking about that aren't just kind of grafted on extensions to the city, but are actually built right out in the desert. That really got going in the 70s. I think it was the 1974 master plan under Sadat, where the government was flush with its perceived success in the 73 war, and envisioned this great modern future for urban Egypt, which involved a great number of desert towns. But it was still then constituted as a nationalistic project, as sort of taming the desert for the future good of Egypt. And as far as I can gather, it was only really at the early 90s, with the IMF structural adjustment loan and the move by the Mubarak regime towards a much more neoliberal economic framework, that these desert towns began to take on something else, which was a place of kind of speculative finance and private profit. And one of the things that interested me and Jason most was this sort of dichotomy between the idea that these places are being marketed as community. If you see the advertising, and we've spent far too many hours in the sales rooms and the mood lounges of companies like Imar and Damak and Al Futtaim, they're being imagined as communal, they're being imagined as a reclamation of something which has been lost in Egypt, something which was once envisioned by the creation of downtown Cairo, by the Khedive Ismail, and has now been kind of destroyed by generations of socialist planning, of overcrowding, of rural migration into the city. And now, just like when downtown Cairo was built, Islamic Cairo was conceived of by the elite as a place of chaos, of filth, of pollution, something to escape from. Now that same process is playing out again, except downtown Cairo is the place that the elite are supposed to be escaping from, and the desert towns are the new frontier. And yet, you know, so the dichotomy that interested us was this idea of kind of community on the one hand and the way it's being marketed, and also the obvious segregation that these often gated communities, and even the ones that aren't gated, their very physical location means that they are very separated from the life of the city. We were also fascinated by the extent to which, in many ways, this is a very neoliberal project. It involves, as I'm sure you know, land sales to private developers and a huge injection of foreign direct investment. But it's also a neoliberal project that's been marshalled by a very aggressive state. The New Urban Communities Authority, which is part of the Ministry of Housing, has plunged almost infinite resources into the new towns. David Sims, who has written a brilliant book that you should all read called Understanding Cairo, compares the investment that has gone into the desert towns compared to the investment that's gone into the Ashwa'iyat, the informal settlements, and it doesn't even begin to compare. I think 22% of foreign direct investment went into the construction and real estate sectors targeted at these desert towns last year. When you look at the comparative population figures, despite the government's best hopes and estimates that these desert towns were going to become homes to millions of people, they still represent a fraction, an absolutely tiny fraction of the greater Cairo population. And finally, we were very interested in the extent to which different types of urban space can facilitate protest or dampen protest. Ursula wrote an excellent piece last year in which she talked about how the urban geography of central Cairo really helped fuel challenges to the political status quo on January 25th and even more so on January 28th. I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of, people were able to move through the streets and move through the alleyways, literally calling people down from their balconies. And if we look back before the revolution, popular quarters like Esbet al-Hagana were again centres of urban resistance to the state. They were part of a process of radicalisation where people realised that they might be able to challenge the political elite. It's very, very hard to imagine anything similar happening, regardless of the social backgrounds of the people who live there, in this kind of urban geography. So again, at this time of ongoing revolution, we thought it would be interesting to kind of discuss these issues and look into it. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, and hopefully they're going to give us a few thoughts, both on the kind of themes I've touched on in Cairo Divided, but also more generally urban development in Egypt, and then we can open it up and ask some questions. I did all my research for this today, and Wikipedia has been down, so I'm going to hope that none of them are too technical. Does anybody want to